Explore the history, relationships, expertise, and data that go into ensuring Stine growers get maximum yield potential. This is the Stine Seedcast. Here's your host, David Thompson.
Hello, and welcome to the Stine Seedcast. I'm your host, David Thompson, National Marketing and Sales Director for Stine Seed Company. We've got another great episode lined up with special guests, expert insights, and discussion on everything you need to know about maximizing yield potential. Today, our special guests are Tony Lenz and Kayla Noble, technical agronomists for Stine. Welcome to the show, Tony and Kayla.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So Tony's been a guest on the Seedcast before, and he's actually celebrating his 25th anniversary with Stine this year. And meanwhile, Kayla is our newest Stine agronomist who joined the team just a few short months ago. Today, we're going to hear their predictions for the 2024 season, what 2023 taught us agronomically, and what Stine's agronomy team is working on. So let's get started. So starting off, Kayla, welcome to the show. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and the area that you work in.
Yeah, definitely. So I actually grew up here in Des Moines. I now live about 45 minutes east of Ames in Marshalltown, and started my career about 10 years ago. Kind of been all over the industry a little bit. Started with Dow, worked for a startup for a few years, spent some time at Beck's, but largely on the research and development side, working with corn and soybean yield trials in nurseries and a little bit of product testing. But honestly, my passion has really been on the agronomy side and working with farmers and growers and making those connections. So I'm really excited to transition over here to Stine on the agronomy side and help push, some of these products towards the market. And, we're a data-driven company, so I think my research background there is really going to help push some of this forward.
Yeah, I would say that sounds like a great background for the things that you're doing and things the agronomy team is doing. So in terms of geography, what part of the world are you going to be working in for Stine?
Yeah, so the territory that I cover is going to be about the eastern third of Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the northern portion of Illinois.
Oh, cool. All right, cool. Well, so on to you, Tony. Like I said, you've been a guest on the podcast before, but just maybe for our listeners who are new, a little refresher about a bit of your background.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me back, David. Sometimes that's always a good thing if you're invited back, so I will gladly say that that's a good thing. But yeah, going on my 25th year here, so it's I always look back, it's just been a fast run, which means it's been a good time with Stine, and started out in the co-op system and then been here for 25 years to really focus on agronomy. That's always been my passion, and Kayla mentioned that too. I think that's what our agronomy group is about, the passion side of it, getting out in the fields. I like the one-on-one with growers, and just it may sound odd, but just digging in the dirt and that warm time of the season and looking at our new products. And so it's been a good 25 years and just seeing this company grow.
Yeah, and your kind of home base is up in Inwood, which is northwest Iowa. I know we stretch you into a lot of different directions, but what is your kind of geographic area that you'll answer for?
Yeah, as of now, this would be the territory I cover, but it would be South Dakota, you go down into Nebraska, and then get into western Iowa. And so I guess I should say the whole western side of Iowa. So again, I think our agronomy group's getting bigger, which is allowing us to maybe tighten down our regions that we cover. And I think that's, to me, is great to be able to do more one-on-ones or hands-on with maybe a smaller area, but still we've got a big footprint that allows us to get, I think, be able to help a grower to understand what worked in maybe Minnesota all the way to, to Nebraska, even though they're different environments to be able to relate to.
Well, and that's a good lead into what I wanted to talk about today, because you're talking about, we know that different parts of the country have different needs in different situations, and yet at the same time, having sort of a holistic view of what happened in the growing area probably is still beneficial, right? So understanding that those things will vary, but I kind of wanted to have you guys talk a little bit about, some of what we've seen and what we think is going to happen. So getting started, we, sitting here today, getting into the planting season, I guess I wonder from your perspectives, what are the things, the lessons that we learned or maybe should have learned from, the last growing season in 2023? What are the things that stand out to you that you hope growers took to heart from what they saw?
Yeah, we can kind of give you a West versus East kind of thing, I guess, a little bit. I was just amazed. I think we work in these product development plots, so we get to look at new experimentals coming down and then current products. But just to see how much these hybrids have advanced to handle heat tolerance, whether it comes to pollination time, was just fascinating how a hybrid could make it through the heat that we went through this summer and still put on kernels all the way around that ear. And then to take it through that heat and wait for timely rains to help that hybrid make it to the season. So I would say in general, to have that much heat in a given summer and to have the yields we had, especially on the western side on corn, was amazing. And a lot of that, granted, there were some sandy areas that struggled and they burn up. They can burn up a lot of summers, right? Yeah. But just to see how long those hybrids could hang on, and then to get a timely rain in soybeans on the west side of the U.S., we held on, and we needed those rains in August, and we got them. And the bean yields were, I think they were up and down, but in general, the growers were very happy. And so,
sure.
Yeah, and to touch on that soybean side, especially in eastern Iowa, southeast Iowa last year, it was really dry. So I know early on in the season, I know me last year working in soybeans a lot, we had some early planted stuff that was planted into moisture and then it was dry. So then we saw some of those stands deteriorate. But I think what was planted and held onto that moisture, it yielded. Vegetatively, there wasn't quite as much growth, but yield hung on.
And I know from going around to different events over the course of this past winter, that was a recurring theme I heard from a lot of growers, was giving credit where credit's due, like you said, Tony, with genetics, to say, 15 years ago, I'm not sure what kind of crop I would have had, but in these challenging circumstances, still harvested a pretty decent crop, and in some cases a fantastic crop, even despite the weather conditions. So,
well, we were still just kind of floored by this smoke thing too. We were talking about this morning, just the smoke that we had this past year and what did it really do? And so you go to agronomy meetings in the winter and you kind of get different things. Was it bad or good? And in the end, I think in some of the areas where we had a lot of heat, maybe that smoke kind of kept that temperatures from getting excessive sunshine on there. I don't know, it was enough sunshine, but we still, so I don't know, that smoke was quite interesting coming out of Canada and what it really did. But in the end, I think growers will tell you maybe some maturities were slowed down. It slowed that maturity down, but in the end, the yields were still there. And so, again, like the drought, the smoke maybe wasn't as bad as, we thought it could be.
Yeah, that's a great point, because I remember last summer on the podcast, we had a couple of different guests that we kind of touched on the Canadian wildfires, and didn't think to come around to, well, whatever came of that. And to your point, not sure we know exactly, but maybe that factored into some of these things in some different ways.
There's even thought too, we talked a little bit about this morning, that maybe some of that sulfur could have helped keep, disease pressure down a little bit too throughout the growing season.
Gosh, yeah, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about the wildfires in a while. So one of the things, obviously, that went right was, even despite some challenging weather, let's say, we did have good yields in a fair part of our area. Is there anything that you'd point to say, well, maybe this could have gone better if we'd had this go a different way?
There's always a way to look back. I guess you could always say, sure, what could have been. I guess I thought the things that helped us, though, is we just had less disease pressure across the country. We had maybe some white mold and some soybeans, some smaller disease packages, but in general, in corn, we did not have major disease outbreaks, that those plants were able to stay healthy, and they were able to fend off enough until we did get those timely rains. And so I think that was, again, you maybe were asking a little bit more on, I thought, things worked well for what they could have been, but just based on timely rains and maybe less disease pressure. And we still had good stock quality throughout the season.
So thinking about that as we look ahead to, what is now going to be planting season here that's upon us. So what are the lessons we need to learn from that? Or how do all those factors, whether it's, drier than average conditions or hotter than average conditions, presence or lack of diseases, what do those factors look like for growers as they get ready to go into a planting season now? What do they need to be thinking about?
I think largely, we know we can't predict the weather, but the trend is that these temperatures are staying above average. We're going to have some of these warmer conditions. So I think one of the biggest things, you can start looking at is, what about planting some of these fuller season hybrids, start experimenting with some longer day maturities, just because, our daytime temperatures aren't necessarily extreme, but it's those nighttime temperatures that are staying above normal. And that's where we're still accumulating some of those GDUs. So, test out some of those fuller season hybrids that are going to yield a little bit better.
And on that same line, I guess I'll kind of go with you on that is then I think, spreading out your risk. I think we can go with maybe another angle some people take is they plant a late or an early hybrid early. They want to beat that heat in the summer, get that thing past that pollination period when maybe the heat kicks in the key part of the summer, they've got that pollination done. So that's another angle some people use is plant an early hybrid early, or you spread out like Kayla's saying is test some of those later hybrids than you have been doing is push. If you're 110 day, maybe you're going to push a little bit of 115 day. Really spread out your risk by having a wide range of maturity in corn. And you can even do that on soybean side. So I think sometimes we get so hung up on having such a tight maturity, like I have to have 110 day corn, 115 day corn in my area. But if you can play on those fringes, you could see how you could affect going through this drought. Maybe we can affect timely rains to help us through that.
Yeah, and it's a great idea around probably just risk mitigation strategy, right? To not have all your eggs in one basket and testing early corn early or going with a little bit of acreage and saying, I want to test the limits of what fuller season corn can do in my area is probably a good way to capitalize on those opportunities. So from a disease or pest management standpoint, are there things that in your particular areas that, maybe reared their head that need to be dealt with that maybe were a little bit outside the norm?
I think one thing, we're starting to look at, especially kind of in the Illinois area, is that presence of red crown rot moving through. So, just being aware of that, doing some research on what to scout for, what you need to be looking for, because a lot of the symptoms, it can easily be confused with SDS and some other diseases out there. So just getting familiar with it, knowing that it's, making its way through the state and seeing what we can do to scout there. But I think the biggest thing at the beginning of the season, control what you can control and prepare for the unknown, so if you know that you've got certain diseases or pests that are an issue in a field, develop that portfolio to be able to tackle that later on as those become present. But, as we start the growing season, just making sure that we're getting that crop off to a good start so it can withstand some of those potential issues we might see later on.
I think off of your Kayla, off that is with these warmer summers, we are seeing warmer temperatures that we're not taking these pests out. They're overwintering, and we're seeing some numbers climb. I want to especially mention rootworm. We're seeing more and more rootworm that is starting to show up in areas. We've got some variants that are starting to form off of northern corn rootworm and on western corn rootworm. And so those numbers are starting to climb just because of warmer winters and the climate that we're going through. So even on corn on bean ground, we seem like maybe we'll see a little bit of pressure in those environments. So I think knowing, like we're saying, is kind of get some good education over the winter, be ready to understand, if you need to go with a traded corn, if you need to do that, or maybe some of these diseases that we have.
Yeah, so in that case, you're saying as a grower, you may not have had a lot of experience with corn rootworm in the last few years, but what we're seeing now is a trend that indicates higher presence in a lot of areas, even areas that historically maybe haven't seen it as much in the last decade, right?
Yeah.
So need to be mindful of that. So one thing that gets talked about a lot recently is early planting on soybeans. So as we're talking here, we're sitting, middle of April. We've talked about kind of how weather's changing and climates are changing. What's your approach or thoughts around this idea of, do you plant beans same time as corn? Do you plant them before corn, after corn? What's your thoughts?
I would just say is I don't think it's a problem with planting soybeans. I just think then you up your management. The management game picks up no matter which crop you want to get out there and plant early. And if you're going to go with soybeans, I have no problem with that. I just like the idea of a seed treatment put on the seed. I think it's something that if you're going to go out there really early and rush that crop in the ground or want to put it in early, you better have some protectant on that because it's going to sit in the ground maybe a while if we stay cool. If you want to get out there. And so have that protection of the insects that could feed on your soybean seed or just the diseases that can come around with that sitting in the ground for a while. So I think anything you can protect that longer, it's a good thing. And it's amazing how hardy a soybean plant is when it comes up and out of the ground. If it's got its cotyledons, it can protect itself pretty good from a cooler temperature when it hits that plant when it's just out of the ground. So it's amazing how that plant can adapt. And I think sometimes people look at their cost input that they have in a soybean. Wise maybe isn't as big as some of the costs that they have in that corn for a replant. Bean plants can give up a little bit of population. We can have maybe a little bit of stand reduction and still get maximum yield. So maybe we're asking somebody to plant a higher population up front, and make sure they run that higher population to protect themselves if we do lose some. But I think we can have a stand maybe a little more uneven in on soybeans versus corn. Corn, we can't put up with uneven emerging corn plants.
Sure.
And there's definitely a lot of research out there too that shows, getting those soybeans in the ground early and getting those longer daylight hours throughout the growing season is definitely shown to have a positive impact. But it's a matter of, if I plant my beans first and my corn later, where's my greatest risk? Is it planting corn late or is it planting those beans late?
Yeah, there's the opportunity cost you have to weigh there. And you kind of hit on a little bit, Tony. So obviously that ups the ante in terms of a few different factors. If you're going to do that, if you're going to go that route, unless you're going to put soybeans in earlier than you typically would, what are those key factors, for either of you, that growers need to be mindful of? Is it beyond frost, obviously, but, what are the diseases, what are the pests that are going to potentially impact that crop?
Well, we could just start with, do you have sidewall compaction when you go in early? I mean, something like that. Do you smear the seed in and it's wet and we get a crust over the top? Do we get it to come out of the ground? I would just start with just mechanical issues first off, if you get that in the ground right. Then if it sits a long time, will we get Pythium or some of these diseases? And that's why I'll go back to the seed treatment side, is if we can get 4 modes of action of taking care of the different diseases, you really try to cover all those, Pythium, Rhizoctonia, Phytophthora. You're trying to cover a lot of those, and that's what a lot of that seed treatment will do. But then again, you buy a really good bean that maybe has, I'll say, a 3A gene for Phytophthora. Look at something like that, or look in the genetic side of it. That should be our strong suit as a seed company, is help you to find that right variety that has a lot of those good attributes in that seed.
Sure. So one answer would be just don't take the straight, kind of racehorse type soybean and plant it as early as you can, because you really need to make sure it's got a disease package it's going to withstand, because it's probably going to be under some degree of pressure more than if you plant that bean in, late May or middle of May. So I know you guys get out a lot and talk with growers, either at grower meetings or visiting their farms. I guess curious, as you've been traveling around over the course of the last few months, what are the things that are on growers' minds, or what are the questions that they're asking? What are they curious about?
I think anytime you come off of a drought year, it's always kind of what happened last year, right? So we always try to make them focus on big picture, you had drought, but we need to, not every year is going to be the same. So again, being diversified. So we get a lot of questions like that. Again, they ask us as agronomy-wise, because we're excited about with our new program with the product development plots that we've been doing on corn and soybeans is what's new, what's coming. And that's what our group is really doing a lot of focusing on is what is in our program, what's in our breeding program, but what are we testing out there, and what will they see down the road? I think it's kind of exciting to let them know we've got some really cool experimentals that we're looking at, or a lot of Stine genetics that are just coming out, and we get to physically go out and evaluate that hybrids all season. And so, what did you see? How did that hybrid stand? What was its standability like? What was some of the characteristics of that plant that you saw? Amazing on soybeans, we get questioned, do I plant it in 15-inch rows or 30-inch rows? Which one's going to bush out? Which one's in line? So I'm kind of excited with our product development is get more hands-on that way to see brand new stuff and see how they adapt. So I think that's probably a big question I get, is just what have you seen?
And in addition to that, with those product development plots this year, we're really pushing getting our RSAs and ISRs out there and getting training in the field, looking at these products hands-on. What are the characteristics that we're seeing? How are they performing? What are we observing? And just getting that information out there to those guys that are selling the seeds so they can help, growers make decisions on what they're putting in their fields. Yeah,
so this is, the product development plots, I know, is a big project that the agronomy team is really, really honed in on, and an exciting opportunity for us. I wondered, Tony, maybe we have, in our background, of course, we have a lot of elite trial testing that we do, which is really, really solid, huge multi-rep, multi-location data. Where does these, what we call PDP plots, where do they fit relative to elite trials, and what's the role that they fill for what we're trying to accomplish?
Yeah, David, that's exactly what we're trying to do is the elite trials is the core of this company. And so we try to have these product development plots in the vicinity. So what you're doing is it's a way to take it, I call it almost like the real world situation. We put it into that grower's population. We put it into his environment, his fertility plan, and then we let Mother Nature do what it does, so it's exciting to see that in close to elite trial where we can compare it to, and then also have it in multi-locations. Replications is very important. I'll just give you an example on the soybean side. We've got 138 replications that we're going to do at 46 different locations. So there's going to be a lot of sites. And that's what the Elite Trials is built on, is get a lot of data points and then pick the best from that. So that soybean side would give you an example, and so on the corn side, we have over 60 locations this year that we're doing on the corn side. Last year, I think we had 40 some locations. So we've taken what we did a year ago, especially on the corn side, and blew that thing up with more people on our agronomy team to look at more data points and to be able to share that with Harry and with the company and compare it to the Elite Trials.
Yeah, and those product development plots, if you look at a map where we have the product development plots and the Elite Trials, they pretty much overlay with each other. And those Elite Trials, our focus there is, the data collection and the yield, but those trials get put on ground that, reduces some of that statistical variability. Whereas with our product development plots, like Tony said, we're shooting for that real world situation. So this isn't necessarily yes, yield is a factor that we're looking at, but the main purpose for these is to look at some of that product characterization and those observations.
And back on your side, the soybean side, we're not treating these beans. I talked about treatment earlier, but we do not want to put that treatment on there. We want to see how these new varieties handle the environment. And so again, there's that observation we want to see. We want to get the final yield. That's a part of it, but more about how did that thing handle that disease without taking out that variable of a treatment, that the treatment covered it. How good is that variety?
Yeah, as a seed company, we kind of want to sort of subject it to the worst case scenario, right? So that we can see, is it going to falter, is it going to excel, and what it's going to do. But in terms of PDP plots, yeah, it sounds like, so our Elite Trial system looks at just a ton of different products and a lot of new things, and a lot of experimental things, and frankly, a lot of things that aren't ever going to make the cut, right? They're going to get weeded out. But the PDP, you're kind of focused on, would it be fair to say, products that you're thinking are kind of in their last stage before commercial. These are the likely candidates, and now we want to put them out in, as you said, a real world environment and say, okay, now what do they look like? How do they respond? How do they react? Is that kind of the idea?
No doubt, especially on soybeans. These are our latest beans that have an EG or an EH on them. When you look at our numbering system, that is our latest products, most current products. Originally started with EAs, now we're up to EHs, and those will be in there. And when we put them in there, they're in large production for next year out of our conditioners. So that's why it's so important this summer to train our group is these are the products you're going to have large volume this next fall. So we always have to remember to tell our group is be thinking, look into the future. That's what our company's about. Think ahead a little bit. This will be when we're in this summer in the field. That's what you're going to be selling in the fall of 24.
Yeah, that's always the challenge with an organization that's as product driven as we are. Is you can't get too hung up on a number, right, or a specific brand number, because the life cycle is so short. And you just have to trust that the pipe is always full and there's always something coming right behind it, right? So we talked about PDP plots. I know that's been a big push to the agronomy department, something that's really, really exciting, relatively new in the last year or two. Are there other things that the agronomy department's working on that you're particularly excited about for 2024?
Yeah, so we're also doing a little bit in addition to these PDP plots, some SCN studies, and alongside that with the red crown rot, like I had mentioned earlier in Illinois, we'll start looking into some of that, but just testing some different treatments that are out there to look at the effects on the SCN that we're seeing, and as well as the red crown rot and how it can help kind of keep those pressures down.
Okay. Yeah, the soybean cyst thing is something that I know the Peking has been talked a lot about lately. That is a very hot topic. You asked the question earlier, what was on the growers' minds? This winter's been a lot on, do I need a Peking soybean? Do I need something for a little more for cyst? Are my cyst numbers climbing in that? But we want to always look at different angles, and Kayla mentioned is try a treatment on maybe even a susceptible product to see if you can take a less in that bean, because sometimes you put more into soybeans, you always worry, does that drag that yield down a little bit? So let's take a susceptible bean and see if you could put a treatment on, and what could that do? So I like this as we're trying lots of different things. So you always want genetics first, but can we see, is there other things that we can test and always be looking at diseases? That's going to be a huge part of our summer, is going to be looking at these soybeans. How are they handling that with not having treatment on? How do they are affected by disease? So, but soybean cyst nematode, we get these dry conditions. We're seeing these numbers climb in cysts. And so, a lot of companies are asking or pushing maybe a Peking, and we have that option, but it doesn't mean that we have to just go that way. We've got other avenues too.
Well, and that's a great point, because when you're looking at genetics, anytime you start to, ideally, in a perfect world, you select for highest yield, right? And then if you said, I need yield, but I also need this and this and this, you're automatically sort of narrowing the pool, right? And so it'd be interesting to see if you could have a treatment that works on SCN as effectively as, let's say, genetic source of resistance. Well, now you're opening up the world of opportunity to say, well, now I don't necessarily have to have maybe an SCN resistant variety. And I'm sure there's probably some integrated management approach where you'd want to have rotation or whatever, but at least you could look at other options and maybe pick a bean that's just the absolute highest yielding bean and then provide some protection through, seed treatment maybe.
Well, and having other options besides that Peking variety, because, as with a lot of these things, we eventually will start developing resistance. And, our research, Tyler Dubé out in Illinois on the research side, he was in Canada for a meeting and they're already seeing some resistance to some of those Peking varieties up there. So, while it's been a great tool to have in our pocket over the last, years that we've had it, it's time to start looking at different ways that we can control some of this. So having those seed treatment options that we can, even if it's not an every year thing, but at least rotate in with some of those Peking varieties just to keep that resistance down.
So, I know you guys are both very strong agronomically. You like to be out in the field digging in the dirt. So winter's probably a tough time for both of you. So what are you looking forward to here as the weather breaks and we get into the planting season?
I always say full throttle. It seems like you go from get yourself prepared, have everything ready, to just living in the field the rest of the growing season. So I'm excited about having another growing season to plant this thing. And again, we're going to have a lot of plots for each one of us agronomists to be able to look at from, I look at it from start to finish. And some of these are experimental stuff that have never really been looked at out here. I think that excites me all the time. When you get to see something that hardly anybody else is seen in the world sometimes, you get to look at something brand new. And so that to me is exciting and every year's different. This, again, 25 years with Stine, and they're never the same. And so what will it be, right? What are you going to throw at us? And we'll attack it and we'll see what it does. And that's me. And maybe that's just a very broad way of looking at it. But, I just want to be excited for what we're going into.
And for me, the field's definitely my happy place, and as also the warmer weather would be nice. But yeah, just getting back out in the field and just seeing everything, all the way from bagging what we're doing now through planting, watching everything grow through the season, and then seeing, the data and the numbers come in at harvest. That's what I like, is just the full picture and watching everything go from start to finish. And then, it's always great too. You think you've got some expectations or things you might see out in the field. And when something throws you for a loop, that's where I get really interested into then trying to dig into okay, well, why are we seeing this, or what happened here, and finding those answers.
Yeah, to your point, Tony, I think it's been said before, you can have 25 years of experience and you think you have, that same experience, but you only have 25 one-year experiences, right?
Exactly what they are, and you just learn off of them, right? You just try to soak it in and learn from people too, though. I think that's another side of it I'll just mention too, is just to have a big coverage area just to get to see so many things go from blow sand to heavy black dirt. So I think that's all we can do as a agronomy group, is try to just sponge it all in and get lots of information. I think that's what people always ask us is, what did you see? What did you see from here to there? And take it all in, and then just try to give it back to them of what we saw, the good and the bad, to watch out for.
Yep. For listeners who are interested in some of the things we've talked about here, whether it's learning more about the product development plots or maybe these SCN trials, or just want to know more about some of the products that are going on in the area, how do you recommend that they learn more information?
I think the biggest thing is our agronomy group is going to relay it on to our sales staff, and that's what we want to do, is we want to train them out in the field, and so then they can relay it on to the grower. I think that's the biggest thing, because I know in this podcast we have anywhere from our dealers to our growers to everybody, that on that line, and just feel like that. That's its whole process, right? And we go back to trust the process is look at the elite trial data. We'll get the information there, but let us tell you how these do in our plots, and we'll train our RSAs, we'll train the ISRs out in the field, really give them hands-on, and we're glad to bring growers in that area and bring them in to take a look at it. We're going to try to do as much as training in the field as we can, and trust that these products are the best ones that we're coming out with, and then we try to agronomically place them, help you place them on the right soils.
Yeah, and like you said, every sales representative that we have has an agronomist representing or backing them up. So anywhere in the system, that's a great resource for any of our customers to be able to reach out through their sales representative, and they can loop in our agronomy team or anybody on the Stine side as well. So, well, Tony and Kayla, appreciate you coming in and joining us on the podcast today to share all of your agronomic expertise and your insights and thoughts for the 2024 planting season. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Yeah, thank you for having us. We're excited to see what this year's going to bring.
Yeah. Well, that's our time for today. I want to thank our guests and our listeners for joining us on another episode of the Stine Seedcast. We'll be back again soon with more expert interviews and insights about all things Stine. And to never miss an episode, subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found.
Subscribe to the Stine Seedcast wherever podcasts are found. To learn more about Stine and its elite corn and soybean genetics, visit stineseed.com. Stine has yield.